Have you ever paid a heavy price just to be treated like a human being, only to receive nothing in return but a look of contempt? Amara Lewis knows that feeling better than anyone. That morning, the airport buzzed like a hive about to burst. Amara walked through the sea of tailored suits, holding her first-class ticket, a ticket she had booked 2 weeks earlier. First class. It wasn't just a seat. It was a statement, I belong here. But, strangely enough, sometimes even the most expensive tickets can't buy you a shred of respect. The first-class gate gleamed under bright lights. A lead flight attendant approached her, a polished smile on her lips, but an icy look in her eyes. "You must be mistaken. Economy is in the back," she said. Her words sounded like a polite direction, but Amara knew better. She'd heard the hidden message too many times before. "You don't belong here." Amara handed over her ticket. The attendant glanced at it, frowned, then whispered something to the flight manager. And just like that, everything was rearranged. Amara was moved to economy. The apology that followed was robotic. "Hollow, your seat has been given to someone more important." More important? Those two words cut like a knife. A white passenger behind her muttered just loud enough for Amara to hear, "Not everyone belongs in first class." An invisible slap in front of a crowd. Amara didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't explode in anger. She simply smiled. A thin, knowing smile, the kind that said the real game has only just begun. And indeed it had. Because what none of them knew was this. That ordinary woman they had dismissed was the CEO of a multinational corporation. And she was about to sign a $500 million partnership deal with this very airline. Within hours, they would learn a painful truth. Some seats are more than just seats. They are tests. And this was one test they had failed miserably. If you've ever been underestimated, judged by your appearance, or treated as though you didn't belong, hit the like button, share this story, and subscribe with the bell icon so you don't miss what happens next. Because that morning, Amara didn't just lose a first-class seat. She ignited a $500 million storm. And this is where it all began. Have you ever paid a price so high just to enter a place where you truly belong, only to feel every stare telling you that you don't? Amara Lewis knew that feeling well. That morning, the airport shined like a maze of steel and glass. Lines stretched across the terminal. The sound of rolling suitcases tapped out the rhythm of a hurried crowd. Amara walked through the concourse with quiet confidence. Her gray business dress, neat bun, and simple flats made her blend in. No one could tell she was the woman who once closed deals with numbers that stunned Wall Street. In her hand was a first-class ticket. It was more than a seat. It was recognition. Yet even the most expensive ticket can't always buy respect. The first-class door came into view. Polished, quiet, a world apart from the noise behind her. A lead flight attendant stepped forward. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong place. Economy is toward the back." The words sounded polite, but the meaning cut sharp. "You don't belong here." Amara paused. She handed over her ticket without speaking. The attendant frowned, then whispered to the flight supervisor. Their talk was quick, too quick, as if the decision had been made long before. Minutes later, Amara was reassigned. The apology was robotic. "Your seat has been given to someone more important." More important, 3 words that weighed her value by skin color and status. Amara didn't protest. She didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, like adding one more note to an open file. Her eyes swept across the cabin. Suits glued to their phones. Stares full of curiosity and quiet contempt. Somewhere behind her, a voice rose. First class isn't for everyone. That wasn't one voice. It was the echo of a lifetime of prejudice. She walked back to economy. The narrow seat pressed her into the corner, but in silence, she opened her laptop. Her fingers typed fast. Not for distraction, for record. Every word, every look, every insult, none of it would be forgotten. Because Amara Lewis was not just a humiliated passenger, and those who pushed her down would soon learn that. In that quiet moment, the real game began. "You're in the wrong cabin." The words dropped into the stillness of first class like a blade, wrapped in a tone of professional kindness, but heavy with contempt that couldn't be mistaken. Amara kept her gaze steady. "No, this is my seat." She held out the ticket, her voice calm, as if stating an undeniable fact. But that didn't matter to the lead attendant. The woman glanced at the ticket, nodded as if she understood, then immediately turned to the flight supervisor. A whisper, a small nod, as if her fate had been decided without her presence even required. "I'm sorry, but this seat is already taken. We'll arrange another for you." An apology that brushed past her like wind. A statement that made every other passenger suddenly pay closer attention to the woman standing there as if watching an outsider being escorted away. Amara didn't move right away. The moment stretched tight like a drawn string. She could hear her heartbeat, loud as a drum in her chest. She knew this scene well, these moments when people tried to shove her into the right place as they defined it. A soft chuckle came from a seat behind her. First class isn't for everyone. A white man's voice, loud enough for her to hear, no shame, no pretense, a throwaway comment aimed to cut. Amara turned. She locked eyes with him. No words, no frown, just a look sharp enough to make him flinch, though he still tried to appear unbothered. "This way, ma'am." The lead attendant's voice stayed flat, pointing toward the back like a guard leading an uninvited guest. Amara followed. Economy was cramped. The seats were hard. The legroom suffocating. She placed her bag in the overhead, sat down, and fastened her belt. The cold, worn leather against her back reminded her exactly where she had been and where she now was. But Amara didn't dwell on the discomfort. She opened her laptop, the glow lighting her calm face. Her fingers moved quickly, not for work, for record. She noted every detail: the attendant's face, the tone of her voice, the white man's comment. For Amara, this wasn't just a flight, this was evidence, and evidence must be kept carefully for the right moment. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and allowed a small smile. A smile that made everything feel like the opening move of a much bigger game. Because Amara Lewis never entered a game without knowing how to end it. The plane lifted off in silence, but inside Amara, an earthquake was rumbling. She stared out of the window. Clouds stacked beneath her like silent witnesses. They had watched her be pushed out of the place she had paid to belong. The flight attendant kept walking the aisle, carefully avoiding her eyes as if Amara's very presence was an uncomfortable reminder. Amara opened her laptop, not to pass the time, but to do what she knew as naturally as breathing collect. Details that others dismissed as nothing, she saw them as evidence. The lead attendant's tone, the averted eyes, the words more important spoken like a dull blade, and that smug chuckle from the man behind her, all of it recorded. On her screen, a new email, the words sharp and cold. "Prepare a meeting with the Aurora Holdings board as soon as I land. Subject: review of our contract with Global Wings Airlines." She typed it like she was drawing the first line of a painting. A painting the people who pushed her into economy never imagined they'd be part of. The cabin grew noisy. A boy begged his mother to switch seats. A passenger complained about the food, but for Amara, it all faded. She was busy imagining. Here's something people forget: the ones they dismiss are often the ones holding their fate in their hands. And in this moment, crammed into a narrow seat, written off as unimportant, Amara held the kind of power that could make an entire airline tremble. She thought of her meetings with Aurora's board, The dense numbers in a $500 million contract, the negotiations, the confident handshakes, the nods of agreement. And now, just one condescending comment could turn it all to dust. Amara closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. She wasn't angry. Anger was a reaction for the powerless. She wasn't powerless. She was preparing to play a game the other side didn't know they'd already lost. Above the clouds, the plane soared on, oblivious that it carried a storm that, in a few hours, would sweep through the plush boardroom of a global corporation. Amara shut her laptop and leaned back, her lips curved into a faint smile. Not the smile of someone humiliated, but the smile of someone who had just made their opening move. They thought this was a minor incident. In a few hours, they would learn it was the beginning of a disaster. The engines roared, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of a giant beast. In economy, rows of seats were packed tight. Strangers brushed shoulders, trapped together in something that felt like quiet endurance. But Amara wasn't just sitting there. She was watching. Her laptop lay open on the tray, a diary in digital form. Amara typed in short, sharp lines, lead attendant monotone voice, plastic smile, flight supervisor whispering, avoiding eye contact, man behind mockery, no attempt to hide it. Every detail wasn't just memory, it was evidence. Bricks in the foundation of something growing inside her. She stared at the screen, but her mind saw different faces, the ones from the boardroom. Stiff handshakes, empty promises, confident nods when that $500 million deal was signed. Amara knew exactly how they saw her a strategic partner, but maybe, like the people on this flight, they had never really seen her. A little boy in the next seat turned to her, eyes wide with curiosity. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice soft and unfiltered. Amara gave him a faint smile. "I'm writing a story." He didn't understand, but he nodded like they had just shared a secret. That answer was enough. Enough for the eavesdropping adults nearby who had no idea they were witnessing the start of a storm. All her life, Amara had walked into rooms where she was the only one with this skin, this voice, this background. She had learned silence, learned to swallow humiliation to reach where she stood now, but today was different. Not because she'd been pushed into economy, but because they thought there would be no consequences. She typed another line, slow and deliberate, urgent. "Meeting at Aurora Holdings headquarters as soon as I land. Subject contract with Global Wings Airlines." Everything would change from here. She closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes half shut as if resting. But inside, a fire burned. A fire the people on this plane and the airline itself would soon feel. Because sometimes, the smallest embers are the ones that burn empires down. Don't be upset. First class is expensive. Maybe one day you'll be able to afford it. Amara heard the words without turning. The man beside her spoke softly, like an attempt at comfort, but his careful, measured laugh turned it into a cut. He didn't ask for her response. He didn't need one. He just wanted her to know what he believed she didn't belong in those leather seats. Amara slowly turned her head and looked straight at him. No frown, no anger, just silence. It was enough to make him blink, turn away, and suddenly find something urgent on his phone. Men like him rarely hold a gaze when the person they see as beneath them refuses to look away. She returned to her laptop. The cursor blinked. Words appeared colder now, sharper. This wasn't just a record of events. It was an autopsy of meaning. More important, from the flight attendant, able to afford, from this man. Each phrase said the same thing: her worth was measured by their eyes, not by who she truly was. A flight attendant pushed a cart past, stopping briefly. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked, voice flat, unwilling. Amara smiled. "No, thank you. The woman nodded and moved on, relieved to be done with the task. In Amara's mind, the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a one-off act of rudeness. It was a pattern. A system built on the assumption that people like her don't belong in those leather seats. And if they do, it must be a mistake. She thought back to that night months ago when Aurora's legal team presented the Global Wings contract. $500 million, a number that could not be ignored. And she, the woman forced into economy today, had signed off on every page. Amara chuckled softly. Not from joy, but at the perfect irony. An airline desperate for her approval for its golden future couldn't even recognize her in the present. Sometimes the world needs moments like this so absurd they rip the mask right off. And Amara knew the game had entered a new phase. Because there was one thing they didn't know. The piece they thought they could shove aside was actually the one holding the board. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. The words had to be precise. No more, no less. She typed, "Prepare an emergency meeting at Aurora Holdings headquarters. Subject review of the partnership contract with Global Wings Airlines." One short sentence, but enough to shake an entire corporation. Because the recipients knew when Amara said review, it never meant just paperwork. It meant every possibility was on the table, including ending the deal. She hit send, then closed the laptop, like sealing a ritual. The soft chime of a sent email barely rose above the hum of the cabin, but to Amara, it sounded like a bell. The signal that the game they thought ended on the jet bridge had only just begun. She sat up straight, eyes fixed ahead. The seat was narrow. The cabin felt small, but she didn't feel confined. The people who had pushed her out of her rightful seat, they were the ones cornering themselves without knowing it. In her mind, faces from the Global Wings boardroom appeared, smiles during negotiations, promises of mutual success, but they had never really seen her. To them, Amara Lewis was just a signature on a contract, a seal of power behind glass doors. Now that name would teach them what it meant to misjudge a person. A flight attendant passed, stealing a glance at her closed laptop. Maybe she thought Amara had been writing to family, or reporting to some superior. If only she knew that email might cost her own boss countless sleepless nights. Amara leaned back, eyes closed, not sleeping, calculating. Every next step, every call to make the moment she landed. Nothing about this was impulsive. It was ordered, strategic, like a chess game. An empire could lose $500 million over 3 simple words. More important, and Amara Lewis, the woman they had pushed into economy, would show them the real cost of the seat they stole. How long until the storm hit for Amara? It had started the moment she pressed send. The plane touched down with a soft jolt, but inside Amara, the impact was anything but soft. As passengers stood, scrambling for their bags, she stayed seated, not from fatigue, but because she had learned to let people rush ahead while she moved later. Carrying something they lacked composure. In the terminal, white light bounced off polished tiles. Announcements pulsed overhead like the steady heartbeat of the building. People hurried past with rolling bags, their faces set toward home or work. Amara didn't join the stream. She stopped. She stood in front of the airline service desk, the place where people came to complain about lost luggage or delayed flights. But Amara hadn't come to complain. She stood tall, still, like a marker planted in a sea of motion. Behind the counter, a young employee looked up, pausing when she met Amara's gaze. It wasn't the look of a tired passenger. It was the look of someone waiting for an answer. "I want to speak to the flight manager." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make the girl nod quickly and reach for the phone. Minutes later, a man appeared. The flight manager, gray suit, tight tie, face flushed, like the knot was cutting off his air. He walked toward her with a pasted-on smile, the kind meant for customers he hoped to send away quickly. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" His tone was coated with politeness, but beneath it was poorly hidden impatience. Amara recounted everything, how she was removed from her first-class seat, every detail. She didn't add, she didn't exaggerate, just the truth, but told in a way that turned each word into an accusation. He nodded quickly, too quickly, and when she finished, his reply came fast, like he'd been rehearsing it. Perhaps we mishandled the situation, but this isn't a serious matter, Passengers face issues like this sometimes. We have far more important things to deal with. Far more important things. Amara heard the words and let out a soft laugh. The laugh of someone reminded once again who she was, or, in his eyes, who she wasn't. He went on, trying to close the conversation. "If you'd like, I can have my staff send you a voucher for your next flight. I think that's reasonable." A voucher, a discount for another flight. That was his idea of her worth. Amara stayed silent for a long moment, long enough to make him shift uncomfortably. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile he would remember for a long time. Because he had no idea how this conversation would unravel his so-called more important things. Before she could reply, he lifted a hand, cutting her off. "This is just a minor issue," he said, his tone losing its fake polish. "We're busy with bigger priorities." Bigger priorities. Amara stared at him. What did he mean? A late flight, lost luggage. Or perhaps those meetings he believed were far more important than talking to a black woman he'd already labeled difficult. She didn't get the chance to answer before he continued. "There are many passengers like you who complain. If everyone made a fuss like this, we couldn't run the system." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Passengers like you." She didn't need him to explain. She knew exactly what he meant. He crossed his arms, leaning forward. "I'll have someone send you the voucher. That's the best we can do. And now, I really can't stand here any longer." His words landed like hammer strikes, each one saying, "You're not a person to be heard. You're just a problem to be managed." Amara didn't react right away. She let the silence grow heavy between them, long enough for him to shift on his feet, his face betraying a flicker of unease. Silence, she knew, could cut sharper than words. "Finally," she smiled, so faint it was impossible to tell if it was polite or mocking. "A voucher," she repeated, voice low and steady. "To compensate for removing a paying passenger from her seat, that's all." He didn't answer. His eyes slid away, unwilling to be drawn into the game she had just started. Amara leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Do you know who you're talking to?" His brow furrowed, but he kept his smirk. "A demanding passenger," he said, half laughing, half shrugging, thinking he'd ended her little act. Amara nodded once. The smile stayed. Then she turned and walked away slowly, deliberately. He would remember that question, and soon he would have an answer delivered in a way he would never want to hear. Amara paused for a beat before stepping forward. No one at the service desk understood what had just happened, but they felt it, a shift in the air. Not forgiveness, not resignation, but the quiet before a wave breaks. She turned back, meeting the manager's eyes one last time. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was colder, deeper, measuring him and finding him unworthy. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice so calm it almost felt like mockery. "You're right. Maybe this really is a small thing, but sometimes the small things are what bring the big ones crashing down." The manager frowned, unsure if she was threatening him or simply making conversation, but before he could respond, Amara was gone. She walked through the terminal, past the rushing crowd. No one knew that the woman with the plain bag had just decided the fate of a $500 million contract. No one knew a global airline had just stepped onto a tightrope they couldn't see. Amara pulled out her phone. A short call to her assistant. Book the boardroom. I want every executive present when I arrive. What's the meeting about? Her assistant asked, nervous. A first-class seat, Amara replied, and the price of taking it away. She ended the call and let out a quiet laugh, not from joy, but from clarity. The people who had pushed her out of that seat didn't know they'd just thrown away the most valuable thing they had. A child ran past, nearly bumping her. The mother apologized quickly. Amara simply smiled and nodded. Small things like that didn't matter. But how an organization treated her a paying customer that wasn't small, that was its nature, and nature always has a cost. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Amara pulled up her collar and headed for the exit. She didn't rush, but every step carried purpose. Each click of her shoes on the tile felt like a drumbeat announcing a coming war. They thought it ended when they pushed her out of that seat. But they didn't know this was only the beginning. The hotel door closed behind her, shutting out the city noise like a stage curtain falling after a bad play. The room glowed in soft beige and warm gold. Elegant, comfortable, but, for Amara, it was only a stop. She wasn't here to rest. She sank into the armchair by the window and slipped off her heels. Her feet ached from a day of travel. But that pain was nothing compared to the sting of being humiliated by an airline she was about to invest $500 million in. She looked at the red marks across her feet and smirked. Pain could be useful. It reminded her she was alive and that the game was far from over. She reached for her phone and called her executive assistant. The voice on the other end was soft, almost bracing for the storm it sensed coming. Prepare an emergency meeting with the board. I want everyone present tonight. We're discussing Global Wings Airlines. Did something happen, ma'am? The assistant's words trembled with caution. Amara gazed out the window. Down below, the city buzzed. Cars crawled along the road leading to the airport, the place where, just hours ago, she'd been forced out of the seat she had paid for. Yes, she said, her voice cold as steel. We're reassessing our partnership with them. And this time, there will be no leniency. She ended the call. The room fell back into silence. But it wasn't the silence of rest. It was the stillness before a storm breaks. Amara walked to the desk. The contract documents still lay there, a reminder of months of preparation, tense negotiations, and sweet promises of mutual growth. Now they felt like masks, shiny, hollow. She placed her hand on the stack and flipped through the pages slowly. Her signature graced the end of each document, a seal of approval for the partnership. But signatures, like trust, can always be withdrawn, especially when the other side shows contempt for the one who signed. Her gaze landed on the airline's logo stamped on the cover, Global Wings Airlines, a name that promised reach and ambition. But to Amara, it now only brought back the image of dismissive stares and the words, "Passengers like you always complain." She closed the folder and drew in a long breath. She wasn't angry. Anger was wasteful. She was calm. And calm is what people fear the most. When the board heard what she was about to say, they would understand this wouldn't be just a meeting. This would be an unmasking. She picked up the phone again, this time a direct call to the chief legal officer. Prepare the termination documents for the Global Wings partnership immediately. Silence stretched across the line. Then terminate. The contract, ma'am. That's a $500 million agreement. His voice caught in his throat. Yes, Amara replied simply. And we're ending it. I want every legal scenario ready. No delays. This time, no silence, just the deep breath of a man steadying himself. Understood. I'll get on it right away. She hung up and leaned back in the chair. In her mind, She could already see their stunned faces. They knew how integral Global Wings had become to Aurora Holdings' expansion plans. They knew she had spent months negotiating every line. And now, with a single call, she was preparing to throw it all away. This wasn't impulsive. Impulse was for the powerless. This was strategy. And when the one with real power changes the game, everyone else adjusts. She remembered her first meeting with the Global Wings board, the stiff handshakes, the sugary greetings with ice beneath them. She'd always known how they saw her necessary, but not equal. Today, that view had been laid bare through a flight attendant and a flight manager. Amara rose and paced the room. Slow, steady steps. She stopped in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. What looked back wasn't a humiliated passenger. It was someone preparing to make an empire bow. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant board meeting scheduled for 9 p.m., conference room 1. Amara glanced at the clock. 3 hours. 3 hours to assemble everything: documents, arguments, and most importantly, the tone. She drafted another email, this one to Aurora's entire executive team. Tonight's meeting isn't just to review the contract. We will decide whether Aurora can continue partnering with a company that fails to respect its leadership. She paused at the word respect. That was the core of it. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about the value of a person and of the company she led. She hit send. Somewhere inside Global Wings headquarters, they still didn't know the seat they stole from her was about to cost them far more than they imagined. Amara stood at the window, looking out at the skyline. The towers glowed like jeweled crowns. The city hummed, unaware that an earthquake was being planned in this quiet room. She sipped water, letting the chill center her thoughts, but on the desk, the thick contract remained. She placed her hand on it like one might place a hand on a verdict waiting to be carried out. $500 million enough to shift the landscape of regional aviation. They thought they were powerful enough to belittle a passenger, but that passenger could erase their lifeline with a single stroke. She reached into her bag and pulled out a card. Amara Lewis, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Holdings. The embossed gold letters gleamed against the black. A reminder the woman they had pushed out of first class wasn't just a passenger. She was the head of the very company set to save theirs. Now, she would turn their arrogance into the most expensive lesson they'd ever learn. She sat at the desk and wrote out her talking points for the meeting. Global Wings has violated the principles of partnership by disrespecting Aurora's leadership. The contract must be suspended for full review. Aurora will only partner with organizations that value people over profit. Each bullet felt like a nail sealing the coffin of what had once been called a historic agreement. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the chairman of the board. "What's so serious? Amara." She read it, but didn't reply. Not out of disrespect, but because some answers are best delivered in a room where everyone is forced to listen. Silence, she knew, made people sit up straighter. Amara leaned back and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she opened them and smiled faintly. "They'll remember my name longer than a flight," she murmured. And a few miles away, the people who had dismissed her still didn't know that name was about to become their company's worst nightmare. The Global Wings boardroom glowed under soft golden lights. A long brown, leather-topped table stretched down the center, flanked by tall-backed chairs like silent sentinels. Luxury watches flashed as hands touched coffee cups or flipped through folders. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that comes when everyone knows the big partner will arrive any minute. The airline's CEO sat at the head, pretending to review documents but stealing glances at the door. To his left, the CFO recited figures in his head like a prayer. To his right, the head of external affairs couldn't hide her tension. Their words were clipped, each sentence trimmed, as if anything extra might set off the room like a powder keg. "Is she here yet?" the head of external affairs whispered, her voice cutting through the silence. The assistant says she's on her way, the CEO replied, trying for calm, but his fingers tapped the table, a restless beat betraying his nerves. None of them dared say what they were all thinking. Why this meeting? Aurora Holdings didn't do surprises. Not when a $500 million deal was days from signing. An urgent evening meeting. All executives must attend. It couldn't mean anything good. The door swung open. All eyes turned. Amara walked in. No bright corporate suit. No jewelry meant to impress. A fitted black dress, a simple silver watch. Her hair pulled into a clean bun. She didn't need adornments to remind them who she was. The way she entered the room did that for her. "Thank you for waiting," Amara said, her voice calm, as if the whole room was part of a plan she'd already written. The executives stood and reached out their hands. She shook each one, meeting their eyes, not rushed, but long enough to make each handshake feel like an evaluation. The CEO quickly pulled out a chair for her. "We're very pleased to have you here, Amara. I hope your flight went well." Amara tilted her head, her thin smile cutting like glass. "Oh, the flight." She paused. Letting the room lean into her words was certainly memorable. A ripple of unease flickered across a few faces. They didn't yet know what she meant, but their instincts told them this wasn't a meeting for signing papers. And in minutes, they would realize this room wasn't for negotiations, it was for fire. Amara placed her bag by the chair, pulled it out, and sat. Even that simple act had weight. The room was so still they could hear the clock tick on the wall. "Before we begin," she said, every word sharp and deliberate, "I'd like to thank your airline for giving me such a unique experience." Her smile widened just enough to make them unsure whether to laugh or brace themselves. "It's rare I get the chance to sit in economy. The service there, well, it reminded me of my college days. Simple, humbling." The words hit the table like a brick. The CEO blinked, then forced a chuckle. "Oh, there must have been some mix-up. We'll look into that immediately." "Oh, no need," Amara cut him off, her tone light but her words razor-sharp. "I know exactly what happened, and I remember every detail. The lead attendant telling me my seat was given to someone more important, the flight manager saying it was just a small incident, and a passenger who told me very plainly that first class isn't for people like me." She stopped, letting the silence thicken. Faces stiffened, cracking like statues under heat. "And you know what's interesting?" Her voice dropped, almost playful in its darkness. "The woman they removed from that seat is the one sitting right here, the one who decides whether your company gets that $500 million investment." The room froze. No one had prepared for this. The CFO stammered, We deeply apologize for—" "Don't?" Amara raised a hand. "Apologies don't erase how you and your employees see a person. Not as a customer, not as a partner, but as a mistake to be corrected." No one laughed now. She scanned their faces, like a prosecutor addressing the accused. "But don't worry," she said, leaning back, her eyes still burning. "Tonight isn't just about my unforgettable flight. It's about whether Aurora should continue partnering with an airline that defines more important the way yours does." They got it now. This wasn't a meeting, it was a trial, and Amara was the judge. No one wanted to break the silence. But finally, the head of external affairs spoke. "Ms. Lewis, this was an incident caused by a few individuals. It doesn't reflect our values. If you allow us, we'll take strict action against those responsible." Amara turned her head, her gaze slicing into him. "And what are your values?" "Protecting the brand by blaming frontline staff instead of questioning the culture that produced them." The CFO jumped in, his voice rushed. "We are truly sorry. What you experienced is unacceptable, but we believe this relationship can still be salvaged. Aurora's investment is the foundation of our expansion plans. And Amara cut in again, soft but deadly. You think respect can be bought with a deal, that a stolen seat, an empty apology, and a signature can make this disappear. No one answered. Amara stood, walking slowly down the length of the table. Her heels tapped against the floor like a clock counting down. What I experienced wasn't an incident, she said. It was a mirror, a reflection of how you see your customers and your partners. We matter at this table, but out there we're just someone you can bump to economy for someone you consider more important. The CEO tried for a smile, but it twisted awkwardly. We're willing to do anything to prove our goodwill to Aurora. Retraining staff, personal compensation. Amara turned to him, cutting him off once more. Goodwill doesn't buy trust, and personal compensation doesn't fix a rotten culture. No one in the room could meet her eyes now. Moments ago, they'd thought this was a signing. Now they sat like defendants, dragged into the light by the very woman they'd underestimated. Amara stopped at the head of the table, leaning forward toward the CEO. Don't fool yourself into thinking this is about a flight. This is about a company that chooses easy over right, and you're about to pay for that choice. She walked back to her chair, crossed her arms, and leaned back. The thin smile on her lips didn't reveal what she'd do next, but it was enough to make the entire room shiver. Because they knew the storm wasn't over. It had just begun. Amara sat upright, fingers lightly interlaced, her icy gaze sweeping across every face in the room. "Let me tell you," she began, her voice steady and sharp, "about the most memorable flight of my life." No one interrupted. These executives, used to steering every conversation, now sat silent, like students waiting for judgment. It was a flight I paid for in full, a seat you market as the pinnacle of premium service. And yet, instead of being welcomed as a customer, I was treated like an intruder. She paused long enough for the silence to press on every chest in the room. The lead attendant told me my seat had been given to someone more important. The flight manager told me it was just a small incident. And a passenger, with refreshing honesty, told me that first class isn't for people like me. The head of external affairs opened his mouth to speak, then shut it again when she turned her gaze on him. "You know what I did," she continued. "I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I didn't threaten. I sat in economy and documented every detail, because I knew the game wasn't about winning on that plane, it was about winning here." A few exchanged glances. They understood now she had been planning this moment from the second they forced her into that narrow seat. Amara tilted her head, a thin smile flickering. Sometimes it's useful to let people reveal themselves. When they think you're unimportant, they speak the truths they hide behind billion-dollar contracts and polite handshakes. She let that hang for a few beats, then leaned forward. "And your employees revealed you, and I'm not sure Aurora should trust its future to a partner like that." The CEO leaned in, grasping for control. "We admit mistakes were made, but this isn't about culture. This was the poor judgment of a few individuals." Amara cut him off. "If it were just one individual, I wouldn't be sitting here. But when an entire system responds as though I'm worth nothing more than a discount voucher, that's not a mistake, that's culture." No one spoke. The air in the room grew so dense it felt like one wrong word could ignite it. And then, with a calm breath, Amara prepared to drop the bomb none of them had dared imagine. She opened her bag and pulled out her laptop. The soft click of the hinge made the entire room flinch. She navigated a few files, opened an email, and turned the screen toward them. "This," she said, "is the email I sent to Aurora's executive board while we were still in the air." The words on the screen were ice cold. "Prepare an emergency meeting to review the Global Wings partnership. Reason, disrespect toward Aurora's leadership representative." She let them read it all before continuing. I didn't write that email in anger. I wrote it with the calm of someone who has spent years watching big companies show their true colors when they think the people they're dealing with are smaller than them. She closed the laptop, her eyes scanning their faces like she was measuring their worth. I want you to understand this decision isn't an emotional reaction from an offended customer. It's the reflex of a leader who has realized her potential partner cannot meet the most basic standard respect. The CFO leaned forward, lowering his voice. We regret that experience deeply, but surely you understand. Aurora and Global Wings both benefit from this deal. To end it over one wrongful act. You think this was a single wrongful act? Amara interrupted. No need to raise her voice. Let me explain why I don't agree. She leaned back in her chair, deliberate. The light attendant saw me with a first-class ticket and didn't even check the manifest. She just looked at me and said I was in the wrong cabin. The flight manager called me a small problem and said they had more important things to deal with. And a passenger told me first class isn't for people like me. She paused, letting each word fall like a weight. That wasn't an incident. It was a chain reaction. One fueled by the culture you've created. A few faces flushed red. The head of external affairs swallowed hard, ready to speak, but froze when her gaze met his. You can blame individuals, Amara said, but you can't deny that their behavior reflects how you really see your partners and your customers when no one is watching. She placed the laptop on the table, tapping the lid with one finger like a judge striking a gavel. And I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to discuss the price of this arrogance. No one dared to breathe too loud. Everyone understood that whatever she said next could wipe out everything they'd been clinging to. The CEO took a deep breath and stood, his face tight as stone. Miss Lewis, he began, softening his tone. We are truly sorry for what happened, but please don't let one small incident destroy the partnership we've built. Both sides have invested enormous time and resources. I ask you to reconsider. Amara tilted her head, as if pondering his words. One small incident, she repeated, each word sharpened like a blade. That's how you define the public humiliation of a strategic partner on one of your flights. No one answered. She stood, her gaze swept the table, stopping on each person like a spotlight. This isn't about a seat. It's about a test and you failed. A test of how you treat people when they're not in expensive suits, not flashing their titles, not carrying the glow of power. The head of external affairs tried again. We'll compensate you. We'll retrain our entire staff. Amara lifted a hand, cutting him off like she was ending a tedious negotiation. Compensation doesn't buy respect. Training doesn't fix a rotten culture. And I didn't come here for promises to do better. The silence thickened, suffocating. Executives stared down at their papers, unwilling to meet her eyes. Amara placed her hand on the laptop, tapping it once more. I've given Aurora a clear directive. Prepared the termination documents. A sharp exhale broke the quiet. Somewhere at the far end of the table, a pen clattered to the floor. Unless, she continued, her tone turning to ice. You can give me one compelling reason to believe Global Wings deserves a place in Aurora's strategy. And I don't mean a reason on paper, I mean action, from leadership. All eyes rose, fear mixing with desperate hope. They knew she had just laid down their last chance. Amara smiled, thin, predatory. Don't answer now. Take the time to consider the cost of your arrogance. And when you have your answer, remember she leaned back in her chair, composed, unshaken. I'm not in a hurry. She sat, hands folded, calm as if she'd just closed an entire chapter. And in that moment, every person in the room understood the storm they were scrambling to contain hadn't passed. It was only gathering strength on the horizon. Amara stood. The leather chair behind her gave a faint squeak as it slid against the floor, as if it too understood this was no longer a meeting. The air in the room was thick, so thick it could be cut with a knife. Every eye followed her as she walked, slow but deliberate, toward the door. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence weighed more than any accusation. It made the powerful men and women in that room, people used to giving orders, suddenly feel small. Amara stopped a few steps from the door. She turned. Her gaze swept across each face, resting longer on the CEO, the man still clinging to his cracked mask of composure. "Here's what I think," she said, her voice low but carrying across the room. "You've spent this entire meeting explaining, apologizing, and assigning blame. But the one thing you haven't done is prove you're worthy of Aurora's trust." Someone tried to speak Ms. Lewis, we. She raised her hand. Enough. It sounded like an order, and it was. The man froze, swallowing the rest of his words. Amara crossed her arms and leaned lightly against the table near the door, giving them time to realize the power dynamic had completely shifted. "We've talked about individual mistakes, about retraining staff, about repair, but you still don't understand this wasn't an accident. This is who you are, and who you are can't be patched over with an apology." The head of external affairs bit his lip, gripping his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Amara tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on them. This contract was a golden opportunity, but you've proven you're not ready. Not for Aurora, not for anyone. The CEO shot to his feet. "Amara, listen to us." "Listen," she let out a thin, sharp laugh. "I've been listening. Since the moment you demoted me from my seat, I've heard exactly how you define important, and I've heard enough to know what needs to be done." She turned toward the door, hand resting on the handle, but then she paused, glancing back, leaving them with a line that froze the room. "This is a moment you'll remember for a long time, not because I walked out, but because of what I'm leaving behind." Amara kept her hand on the handle, then turned fully back toward them. The room held its breath. Every face from the power brokers to the silent observers was frozen, waiting for her next words. "You," she began, voice steady as metal striking stone, "decided I wasn't worth a seat. So I've decided this contract isn't worth a signature." No one reacted. A few opened their mouths, but no sound came out. Her words cut away their defenses like a blade. The CEO's face went pale. "Amara, you can't be serious." "Can't be serious." Amara let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Interesting. When I was treated like I didn't belong, it was a small incident. But when I decide to pull $500 million from a company that disrespects its partners, suddenly that's what you call not serious fascinating." A chair screeched. The head of external affairs had stood, planting his palms on the table like a man trying to hold on to any scrap of control. "Give us a chance to make this right. Don't punish the whole company for the poor judgment of a few." Amara turned to him, her gaze like ice. "A few, no. This was your company's true face when you didn't know who you were dealing with, and I don't invest in companies that only act professional when it benefits them." The CFO jumped in, his voice shaky but desperate. "If you terminate this deal, both sides lose. Aurora will sacrifice a major piece of its expansion strategy, and we." Amara lifted her hand, silencing him. "I know exactly what Aurora stands to lose, but do you know what you will lose? Not just this contract, but credibility. You'll have to explain to your shareholders how Arrogance on one flight cost you your golden ticket." She stepped forward, planting both hands on the cold table, leaning in. "Make no mistake. This isn't retaliation. This is a lesson. A company can't fly high while disrespecting the very people who help it take off." A few people swallowed hard. They knew this wasn't negotiation anymore. This was judgment. Amara straightened, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. I don't need your apologies. I need proof that you understand what truly matters. Until then, this contract stays on the table unsigned. She turned back toward the door. And only then did they realize the storm didn't arrive with a roar. It arrived with the cold silence of a verdict being handed down. Amara paused at the threshold, almost as if giving them one last chance. But no one spoke. The room was dead silent, save for the dull hum of the air conditioning, a sound that now felt like a ticking clock. She glanced back. You thought I came here to negotiate. You were wrong. Her voice didn't rise, but each word hit like a hammer. I didn't come to fix this relationship. I came to end it. A murmur broke out at the far end of the table, quickly swallowed by silence. The CEO shot up, face red. Amara, you can't. Can't, she smirked, her smile thin as a blade. You really believed a first-class seat was just a small matter, that arrogance comes without a cost. Let me make it clear, Aurora will no longer partner with Global Wings. The $500 million deal is officially dead. The words sliced through the air, leaving the room in stunned silence. The CFO dropped his pen. It hit the table with a sharp crack. The head of external affairs opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Even the CEO, the man who had raised his voice minutes ago, just stood there, wide-eyed, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Amara walked back to the head of the table, standing tall. You taught me how you see people. Now, let me teach you something a contract can't buy: respect. And a partner who doesn't give it doesn't deserve to keep the deal. She gathered the documents on the table, each movement slow and deliberate, letting them feel the weight of the numbers slipping from their grasp. Before leaving, Amara paused. She tilted her head, sweeping them with one last look. Remember this next time? The economy passenger might cost you more than first class. Her words landed like a blade thrown across the room, cold and precise. Then she opened the door, walked out, and closed it behind her without looking back. On the other side of that door, the air collapsed. The once confident power players now sat frozen, already calculating the frantic calls they'd have to make, the impossible explanations they'd owe their shareholders. And only now did they understand the seat they took from Amara hadn't just stolen her comfort. It had cost them their future. Amara stepped out of the building. The glass doors closed behind her with a soft click, like the final lock on a verdict that had just been handed down. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled gold across the stone steps, the shadows of trees stretching long and twisted on the pavement. The city was still alive, still moving, but to Amara, everything felt slower. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. No more darting eyes, no more excuses, just the silence of her own thoughts and a decision that had just shaken an entire corporation. Passers-by didn't notice her. To them, she was just another black woman in a simple black business dress, leaving some unremarkable meeting. They didn't know that minutes ago. In that room, she had erased a $500 million contract with nothing more than a few words and a single no. She paused at the top of the steps, looking toward the parking lot ahead. Her phone buzzed in her bag. It was Aurora's executive assistant. Amara answered. "Is the meeting over?" the assistant asked cautiously. "It's over." "And the outcome?" Amara walked slowly down the steps, her heels tapping against stone in an even rhythm. "The contract has been terminated." On the other end, silence. "Then I'll inform the board." "Do that," Amara said, her voice calm, "and tell them this: if a partner can't respect us in the smallest things, they don't deserve the biggest ones." She ended the call, slid the phone back into her bag, and kept walking. The sun was still shining, but she felt none of its warmth. This wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, a line that said Aurora, and Amara herself, did not exist to be pacified with vouchers or hollow apologies. Amara stopped and tilted her head to the sky. Airplanes carved white streaks across the blue expanse. The image made her smirk. Global Wings was still flying, but they had no idea that a door had just slammed shut on the future they thought was theirs. Some victories don't need noise. Sometimes you just stand, walk away, and let them wrestle with the ashes of what they destroyed. She tightened her grip on her bag strap and drew a long, steady breath. Because this wasn't just a lesson for them, it was for anyone who had ever thought a black woman only belonged in economy some seats. Once taken away, can burn an entire empire to the ground. She had just turned onto the small street leading to her hotel when her phone buzzed again. A message from Aurora's communications team. The news is out. Media reporting Global Wings loses $500 partnership with Aurora Holdings. Amara stopped walking, reread the message, making sure she'd read it right. The news had spread faster than she expected. She had known it would leak, but not this quickly. She opened her browser. Headlines flooded the screen. Shock for Global Wings, Aurora withdraws from landmark deal. $500 million vanishes. After closed-door meeting. Who is behind this decision? She scrolled down, reading the comments. Some were shocked, some delighted, others curious. What could make Aurora walk away from this deal? Maybe Global Wings underestimated their partner. A lesson for companies that disrespect their customers. Amara let out a small laugh, not of joy but of irony. Those who once treated her like someone unworthy of a seat were now being dissected, judged, and ridiculed by the entire world. Somewhere in that building, the Global Wings executives were no doubt drowning in chaos. She could imagine it: the emergency meetings, pale faces, sharp words flung across the room, frantic calls to lawyers and PR teams. A once untouchable empire, now scrambling to salvage its dignity and its stock before it was too late. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from a journalist she knew, Amara. Were you behind the decision? People are saying you personally killed the deal. Amara didn't reply. Not because she was hiding, but because she knew silence can be the strongest statement of all. They didn't need her to confirm it. They all knew the truth. A black woman once bumped to economy had just brought an airline to its knees with the consequences of its own arrogance. She kept walking, her heels striking the pavement like the steady drumbeat of a quiet victory march. She didn't need to look back. Behind her, an empire was staggering. And this was only the beginning. When this story spread, the world wouldn't just talk about a contract being canceled. They'd talk about a new era, one where seats weren't granted by privilege, but by true worth. Amara wheeled her suitcase through the airport, past rows of neatly lined chairs in the terminal. The next flight flashed across the departure board, white light blinking cold but familiar. She had booked this trip in advance, a simple choice. Not first class, not economy as others had defined for her, just a seat to get her where she needed to go. She passed through security. No one stopped her. No one looked twice. Just a black woman in a plain coat with her hair neatly tied back, an ordinary passenger. And Amara liked it that way. Invisibility gave her space to think, to observe. On the plane, she stowed her bag in the overhead bin and slid into her seat. The window opened to a pale gray sky, streaked with the white trails of other flights, remnants of journeys still in motion. She leaned back, eyes half closed, not tired, just deep in thought, about the first-class seat she paid for but was denied, about the faces that day, the lead attendant, the flight manager, the passenger behind her, all delivering the same message: "You don't belong here." She chuckled softly. How ironic. The people who thought she didn't belong in first class didn't know they'd just been cut off from a seat far more valuable, a partnership with Aurora. Amara unlocked her phone, typing a quick note, not a report, just a thought worth keeping. Sometimes A seat isn't just a place to sit. It's a test of dignity for the one who claims it and the one who grants it. She read it once more, letting the words echo in her mind like a quiet reminder. Not for Global Wings, not for Aurora, but for herself and for anyone who had ever been pushed out of a place they rightfully deserved. A flight attendant passed by. "Can I get you anything?" Amara shook her head, offering a soft smile, not the sharp, cutting smile from the boardroom. Just the smile of someone who had done what needed to be done and left the past behind. The plane began to taxi. She looked out the window, watching the runway stretch ahead, leading to a new horizon. Sometimes, the strongest response isn't an argument. It's standing up, walking away and leaving them to sit in the ashes of what they've destroyed. Amara closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. The plane lifted off the ground. And somewhere out there, Global Wings still didn't know this lesson would haunt them far longer than a lost contract. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.